Our top story this hour, U.S. visa restrictions was the top of the discussions between Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and his Nigerian counterpart on Tuesday at the State Department. Nigerian Foreign Minister Geoffrey Onyeama said his country was blindsided by the Trump administration's announcement last Friday that several countries will no longer be eligible for visas, allowing them to live in the United States permanently. They will still qualify for tourist and business visas, but Nigerians rarely are granted those now because the U.S. says too many visitors from the West African country overstay their visas.
And we're pleased. Foreign Minister and I discussed how we can tighten our trade ties even further, including infrastructure investment, embracing free market policies that attract capital, private capital, ensuring consistent enforcement of the law, and doubling down on anti-corruption efforts are the surest way to grow prosperity in Nigeria and all across the region. And we're pleased, too, that President Buhari has prioritized that fight against corruption. In support of that fight, I'm announcing today that the United States and Nigeria have signed an agreement to return to the Nigerian people more than $308 million in assets stolen by a former dictator. Nigeria was one of the first African nations to join the global coalition to defeat ISIS. America is now supporting the Nigerian fight against ISIS's larger global affiliate, ISIS West Africa, a dangerous threat to both of our countries. In part due to this terrorism threat, on Friday, President Trump announced the suspension of immigrant visas for Nigerians because Nigeria has room to grow in sharing important national security information. I'm optimistic that's going to happen. In the proclamation, President Trump highlighted Nigeria's importance as a strategic partner in the global fight against terrorism and recognized the government's commitment to improving information sharing with us. The Foreign Minister and I also discussed today the massive humanitarian crisis that the conflict with Boko Haram and ISIS West Africa and other religious and ethnic violence. We know that these issues are hard. We know that they're complicated. But I strongly encourage the Nigerian government to do more to protect its civilians, including religious communities, and the humanitarian organizations seeking to assist them. To aid in this effort, I'm pleased to announce today an additional $40 million in humanitarian assistance to Nigeria, adding to the nearly $350 million that we provided last year.
And, you know, of course, on the way here, or just before coming, we were somewhat blindsided with the announcement of the visa restrictions by the U.S. And, you know, of course, a lot of people back home in Nigeria understood it and put different interpretations and different spins on it. But it's, you know, essentially very straightforward, and it was very gratifying to come here speaking to U.S. officials and to understand more clearly the reasoning behind this. You know, their security measures that were taken, you know, with regards to passports, electronic passports, lost and stolen passports, data, you know, being shared, criminal histories being, you know, made available and shared of known terrorists and suspected terrorist information also being made available. And the U.S. officials have also confirmed that we have been able to tick most of those boxes. With regards to lost and stolen passports, we're putting in place the architecture that will now make that the information and the data on that immediately available to the U.S. and all the member states and member countries of Interpol. And we hope to have that up and running, you know, very soon, and no longer going through third parties. And you know, hopefully, once that has been achieved, we look forward to being taken off this visa.
Well, there's Geoffrey Onyeama saying that the Nigerian authorities were blindsided, but not according to the United States. According to them, they made clear the criteria that was required. They had Chad on the list of countries to be banned. Chad was able to fill that gap, as Mike Pompeo euphemistically put it, that room to grow. Chad was able to come to their standards and taken off the ban. Nigeria was not. But I do agree with Mike Pompeo in that I'm also optimistic that the ban will be lifted, because, you know, one thing we're experts at is addressing issues after the horse has bolted from the barn, but we're going to try and get the horse back and shut it back in the barn. There's now been a committee, so they'll look at the issues. And the issues that are being raised are, frankly, not entirely unreasonable, it must be said.
Exactly.
We all know that we have certain lapses that really do need to be filled with regards to the ease with which anybody can walk off the streets and get a Nigerian passport, whether or not you're actually Nigerian. The fact that we don't keep proper records of anything from crime to education. I'm sure you know of people who struggle to get their transcripts from universities, for example, and they've just disappeared. It was handwritten in 1982 and chucked in a bin somewhere. I mean, these are lapses that we do need to work on.
Well, I think this is a good development, and the tone of the interaction between the U.S. Secretary of State and his counterpart from Nigeria, Geoffrey Onyeama. I think it's, encouraging, as different from the kind of, rhetoric that we had on the table about 2 weeks ago. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of Nigeria had announced that he was going to the U.S. for a meeting of the U.S.-Nigeria Binational Commission. And it is, expected, of course, that at that meeting, some of the hot issues, between Nigeria and the United States will be considered, particularly the visa restriction that has been placed on a category of Nigerians. Clearly, I mean, as U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo pointed out, the U.S. uses a sanction and reward system, even in its foreign policy process, and it gave enough indication of that. Now, they've sanctioned Nigerians who overstay and said, look, we have placed this visa restriction, which is the prerogative of the country that is issuing visas. But you will see that in the course of that interaction, he also announced aid for Nigeria. That's typical U.S. foreign policy tactic, carrot and stick. But we should not just assume that, the hope that has been given that the restriction on certain categories of visas will be lifted, is automatic. No. Because I see that many Nigerians are already happy, they will soon lift it. They will soon lift it. It will be based on performance.
Exactly.
And that will mean, and Pompeo alluded to that when he said, the sharing of useful information. Yeah. So this step has been taken, as a way of twisting the hands of the affected countries to level up and cooperate better, with the United States. And I guess, it's achieving the result. It will achieve the result. But as I said, it's based on what we do at this end. Because you will recall that on February 3, I think, 1987, February 1, 1987, 33 years ago, that was the day the Margaret Thatcher administration decided to stop visa-free access for Nigerians going to the United Kingdom. At a point, Nigerians used to go there, without carrying any visa. But your Nigerian passport was as good as the British passport. But when they stopped us from coming in, now, I don't remember whatever reasons they gave it again, many years later, the United Kingdom has not found any reason, to revise that. And I guess it's because they do not think that Nigerians really deserve to have free access to the United Kingdom without visa. Now, Nigerians also at a time used to have, almost free access to Italy, until Nigerians went to Italy and they became drug barons, drug lords, and they were involved in scandalous cases of murder. And then the Italians also started restricting access for Nigerians. So it's about how we play our own part of it. As for the minister saying Nigeria was blindsided, well, what is in the public domain is that Nigeria was notified as far back as March 2019. And we have many cases of government not playing its part and creating, when the problem then occurs, we start to run helter-skelter. We hope that in this case, the committee that has been set up will advise government appropriately and the right steps will be taken. But, on the other hand, yesterday the president launched a new visa policy for Nigeria. So for those Nigerians who want to come back home, I think now they can have, some categories of visas, to be able to access the country with their children also who may have been born abroad.
Honestly, it's just a very upsetting situation because sometimes you would hope that the government would see certain things coming. And I like what you first said, Tundun, when you said that it took you by surprise for the foreign minister to come and say that they were taken by surprise, because at the end of the day, we can give the story of Chad and how they managed to come through with the information sharing that was required of them. And There are no lies here. We do have humanitarian crisis all over the country. Mike Pompeo also stated that from the U.S. we collected $350 million for humanitarian aid just last year. Now we have another $40 million for humanitarian aid coming in. That's almost $400 million. So to the United States, what are the results? What are the results of the humanitarian aid that we are supposedly bringing your way? At the end of the day, to the average citizen, this is just a very upsetting situation to be in, because one would hope the government would do better, and it starts with the human development of your people, or you cannot expect any results from them anywhere in the world.
Absolutely not. We're going to take a short break now. We'll be back with more news headlines. Please stay with us. Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. More news headlines. The United States has stated that $308 million Abacha loot, which will soon be repatriated to Nigeria, must be placed in an account. And if the money is stolen from that account, Nigeria will be made to replace it. The spokesperson for the U.S. State Department, Morgan Ortagus, said in a statement that this was one of the agreements that was made between the U.S., Nigeria, and the island of Jersey, where the funds are being kept. The statement read in part, the funds will be used by the Nigerian Independent Sovereign Authority for 3 infrastructure projects in strategic economic zones across Nigeria. To ensure that the funds are used responsibly and for the good of the nation, the agreement includes mechanisms for monitoring the implementation of these projects, as well as external oversight, and it requires Nigeria to repay any funds lost as a result of any new corruption or fraud to the accounts established to hold the returned assets. This return reflects the growing international consensus that countries must work together to ensure stolen assets are returned in a transparent and accountable manner. End quote. Rotus there, you almost made me start laughing because I saw that. I mean, I feel like we're being treated like children, but if you behave like a child, you have to be treated like a child. Honestly. When funds get relooted, this is why you have rather insulting clauses like this being attached.
Well, I don't think it's insulting. I mean, because Nigeria even agreed to it. Because
it is insulting, but it's justified.
Well, but we were part of that meeting.
Yeah, it's justified,
and we agreed.
But
it's in keeping with the concern of many Nigerians that we don't have enough information. There's no enough transparency about how repatriated funds are, treated when we get them back. Exactly. But what they've tried to do here is to give an indication of what will be done with the money. And it's a very good idea that the money is going to go to the Sovereign Investment Authority, which has shown great efforts, despite the fact that the Nigerian government has not really invented much in it. Since, that NSIA was created, I think they've just been given just about $2 billion, and those who know the subject better argue that, look, you put more in the NSIA fund so that we could have more in terms of co-investment and in terms of delivery and in terms of performance. The Sovereign Investment Authority has shown better performance. It's good that this is not going to be money that will be put somewhere in one piggy bank, because Nigeria has too many piggy banks. And at the end of the day, you don't know what happens to the money.
I thought you were going to say Nigeria has too many sticky fingers.
We love the cookie jar, don't we?
We do. Anyway, Rotus, it's good to have you this morning. With business news, yes. What do you have for us?
Well, yeah, I mean, the conversation in the business community has mostly been about revenue. I mean, we're talking here about the repatriation of funds and how much money Nigeria needs. Saw something interesting just yesterday. The Finance Minister for South Africa, Tito Mboweni, sent out a tweet saying that South Africa needs to be able to get into trading of legalized marijuana in order to be able to raise revenues for the country. So South Africa right now, they're facing a revenue shortfall of about 55 billion rand, it's about $3.5 billion. Nigeria, if you look at our 2020 budgets, 8.4 trillion naira, 8.42 trillion naira projected revenue, about 10.5 trillion expenditure, 2.1 trillion deficit, which is about 5.5 billion naira. We are also needing funds as well. So to draw a link between the Finance Minister, Mr. Mboweni, and the Governor of Ondo State, Mr. Akeredolu, he also made the case about a few months ago that since it's grown naturally there, that Nigeria should look into trading of legalized marijuana, because the compound annual growth rates of the crop, as far as global trading, is supposed to hit about somewhere between 25-31% between now and 2025. So that means that it's an asset that's looking to generate revenue. I think in the West now, there's some companies that trade it as a stock. Some are actually startups around it. But the challenge for us would be its legalization, use amongst the youth. You know, we have this whole issue with codeine and so on and so forth. We don't want it to be abused. So it's a gray area, but the key discussion is the revenue that it can possibly generate. Looking at
what we know, you know, in a 2017 article, you know, on one of these websites, I think livefly.com or whatever, you know, we're told that the informal trade in marijuana or cannabis or herb, you know, whatever term it is called anywhere, it's about $200 billion annually. And that, you know, the formal market itself is worth about $100 billion annually. And you have countries that are already in that, you know, marijuana economy, export. You have Canada and the Netherlands leading at the time. The UK is there.
The United
Germany,
States of America.
Chile, Argentina, so Russia, even China. So as a result of this, quite a number of people have been saying, look, if you want to diversify your economy, you can also, you know, consider marijuana as a weed, but as an export material. But as you've pointed out, in South Africa, you can't buy and sell it.
Correct.
But you can use it for medical purposes,
Correct.
as the Constitutional Court ruled in 2018.
Right.
In Nigeria, it is illegal.
Completely illegal, yes.
You mentioned Akeredolu Rotimi, the governor of Ondo State.
Yes.
Now, marijuana was even a campaign issue in Nigeria in 2019 when Sowore insisted that, look, Nigeria could make a lot of money from weed export.
But he was lampooned for that.
Yeah.
Well, he was lampooned, but he insisted. And the reason perhaps that he was lampooned was for religious and sentimental reasons.
Yeah.
You know, in Nigeria, once you talk about marijuana, you know, different communities have different terms for it.
Doctor.
Yorubas will call them amugbo, you know, drug addicts,
Doctor.
because it's a psychotropic substance.
But look at this example. Marijuana was the drug that literally, or should I say the drug, was literally the product that solved Colorado's entire homelessness problem.
Right.
There's a difference as well, and experts explain, between what is being sold, the product as CBD, and THC, which is the drug that gets people high.
Right.
The CBD market is what has managed to generate all that revenue, which is why it has been legalized, because that is not what can actually get you high. In New York, for example, to put any THC into the products, the max you can put is 0.3%, which in essence cannot do anything to anyone. So the arguments about it being a drug that can get people high...
marijuana
No, I'm talking about how it diversifies economies. It managed to solve Colorado's entire homelessness problem. We need to be able to open our minds and think outside the box. There's a way to go about putting it into your economy without it becoming a drug problem across the country. You just have to be strategic.
Right, and so the thing, and so that's the challenge that Nigeria would have to face, in that how do you walk that fine line? Because you can't, I mean, look, with Dr. Abati has already given us the figures here. Our budget, 2020 budget in dollar terms is $25 billion. I mean, the revenue projections from this are 4 or 5 times our budget, so it's huge. But then how do you now, again, because you cannot turn a blind eye to, unfortunately, maybe it's an unemployment, side effect of unemployment, the youth drug problem that we have.
Do you know
and
how many people it would employ?
Right, it would employ a lot.
Do you know how many youth it would employ?
True.
You know, we have to be able to think outside the box. It would give people jobs. The only reason people are on the streets is because people don't have jobs.
Correct.
Right? Yeah, while we're looking at marijuana, I think governments, whether in South Africa or also here, should also look at more other innovative ways
be able to
of expanding the revenue base.
Yeah.
You know, in a manner that you know, projects leadership.
Correct.
And
is
good
ethical.
governance.
Correct.
Because those are the two major issues in Africa.
It's a big thing. Thanks for having me.
Thank you,
Rutus. Thank you.
So we'll take a short break now. We'll be back with sports headlines with Aaron Akeredolu. Stay with us.
Welcome back to the Morning Show here on the Arise News Channel. Now with us in the studio is Aaron Akeredolu, Arise News sports analyst.
Good morning.
Now, what's happening in sports?
Good morning.
Yeah.
Leila, good morning. Tundu, looking very flowery today. Beautiful. Okay, radiant. Doctor, good morning. Let's get straight into it. As a matter of fact, right now, one of the hottest stories that have actually been hitting the headlines has been the fact that Manchester United has signed Ojo Jude Igalo. That's no news anymore. But as a matter of fact, yesterday he was actually given the jersey number 25. And everyone seems to be celebrating, sometime in the month and on the 17th against Chelsea. He should make his debut. But since yesterday night into this morning, social media have been agog by the fact that Ojo Jude Igalo technically is not the first Nigerian to play for Manchester United. And not even Kanu. I mean, his name is Kanu Wako, played for Arsenal.
Okay.
There's a man called Remy Mark Moses, whose father and mother were Nigerians. He played. He grew up in the UK.
Look at that
and as a matter of fact, he grew up in the UK, played in Manchester United from 1981 to 1989, and he's still there. He's 59 years old as we speak right now. And people are saying that for those who have been celebrating and waving the white flag and saying Ojo Jude Igalo has achieved a great feat, that this man, although he played for England, throughout the youth
Okay, then you just ended the debate. He played for England. Finish.
That's why I said technically. That's why I said technically, he's not a Nigerian, but he's of Nigerian parentage from the father and mother side.
Okay, he's British Nigerian.
It's a bit of a complex.
Congratulations to him. He will be wearing, the same jersey that was worn by Antonio Valencia,
yes,
and Quentin
Fortune, South Africa's Quentin Fortune,
South Africa.
Yes.
But I think what is even more remarkable is the controversy that is being on loan to Manchester United has generated. Some, pundits like Gary Neville, like Gus Johnson. They don't think that it's a good move. But we've moved beyond that now. On February 17, he will most likely, if he's considered fit, show up in the match against Chelsea. But I think there's another side of it, which is the boots, the red boots, the Nike boots that he's going to don when he gets onto the pitch, which he has dedicated to his sister, who died on December 12, 2019, one Mary Atole. And he has the name of the sister penciled onto the red boots. Yeah. And then next to her name is, the Nigerian flag. Yeah. So even as he comes out on the pitch on February 17 or at any time, Ojo Igalo will be remembering his sister, and he will also be flying the flag of Nigeria. And I think that is quite commendable. And I hope he does well, as he did when he was with Watford. And, I think many of us are excited that this boy from AJ City, Ajegunle, in Lagos, is now in Manchester City, to do magic.
Yeah, and I hope he does well. He needs to prove the naysayers wrong. As
he really does. He honestly does.
Emmanuel Sheyi Adebayo, typical example, he went to Real Madrid and he was a colossal disappointment. We're hoping that Ojo Jude Igalo finds better fortune.
No bad luck for Igalo.
Thank you very much.
All right.